Right now, somewhere on this planet, the ground is moving. Not metaphorically, actually cracking, slipping, releasing energy that's been building for decades. In the last few months alone, we've watched 2 catastrophic earthquakes hit Venezuela within 39 seconds of each other. A magnitude 7.4 shook Japan hard enough to trigger a full tsunami warning. Scientists in California just confirmed the San Andreas Fault is under more stress than it's been in 1,000 years. And in the same stretch of time, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and Nicaragua all got rattled too. So is the planet suddenly waking up? Is this some kind of coordinated seismic event? Stick with me, because the real answer is stranger and more important than a simple yes or no. And it might change how you think about the ground under your own feet. Let's start with Venezuela, because what happened there on June 24th, 2026, is now the most destructive earthquake sequence the country has seen since 1900. And sequence is the key word. This wasn't one earthquake, it was 2, separated by only 39 seconds. Not even enough time to get outside. The first quake hit at magnitude 7.2. Before the shaking even stopped, a second and larger one followed at 7.5. Both were centered near the town of Yumare in the Yaracuy region in northwestern Venezuela, and both were strike-slip ruptures, the kind where the ground on either side of the fault line grinds sideways past itself. Some scientists analyzing the data now think the 2 events were so closely linked they should really be treated as one complex rupture equivalent to a magnitude 7.8. Here's why the numbers matter so much. These quakes were shallow, only about 10 kilometers deep. When a rupture happens far underground, the surrounding rock absorbs a lot of the energy before it reaches the surface. Shallow quakes don't get that cushion. Nearly all the force slams directly into whatever is sitting above it. And what was sitting above it, in this case, was a country already in economic freefall, where building maintenance had been neglected for years, and construction standards in poorer neighborhoods were barely enforced. Hundreds of thousands of people were living in brick and block structures never engineered to flex under seismic stress. When the ground lurched twice within a minute, those buildings didn't bend. They came down. In La Guaira, the coastal state sitting almost directly above the rupture, reports suggest roughly 80% of buildings collapsed. Caracas endured a full 60 seconds of violent shaking. Power failed across large areas, cell networks went down, and that meant families couldn't find each other and rescue crews couldn't coordinate. USGS's automated damage assessment system estimated a 44% chance the eventual death toll would land somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 people, and a 30% chance it could exceed 100,000. Officially, confirmed deaths have climbed past 3,800, with more than 16,700 injured. But almost nobody working the disaster believes those numbers reflect reality. Multiple missing persons? Trackers put the number of unaccounted people somewhere between 31,000 and over 50,000, and the UN's humanitarian chief has publicly said more than 50,000 people remain missing. A pathologist working inside La Guaira, speaking anonymously out of fear, said the official toll doesn't come close to what she's actually seeing. Bodies stacking up faster than refrigerated storage could handle, forced outside into the June heat. And Venezuela was already drowning before this happened. Roughly 8 million people needed humanitarian aid before the quakes hit. Hospitals were already stretched thin, medical stockpiles already low. Satellite analysis suggests closer to 59,000 buildings were destroyed or badly damaged. Not the few hundred the government initially claimed, including hospitals and schools. Estimates for total economic losses run as high as $37 billion, close to 6% of the country's entire GDP, gone in under a minute. Now compare that to Japan. Around the same window of time, on April the 20th, 2026, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck off the Sanriku coast in northeastern Japan. Shaking was felt from Hokkaido all the way down to Aichi Prefecture. Tens of millions of people felt the ground move for several minutes. Authorities issued a tsunami warning, evacuated roughly 44,000 people from coastal areas, and an 80-centimeter wave was recorded before the warning was eventually lifted. The final toll? About 200 power outages, 2 minor injuries, 0 deaths, 0 building collapses. Read that again. A magnitude 7.4, a genuinely massive earthquake, and the outcome was 2 scraped knees. This isn't luck. It's not that Japan's earthquake was somehow gentler than Venezuela's, it's that Japan spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. Its building codes are among the strictest on Earth and are updated constantly as new seismic research comes in. Structures are engineered to sway instead of crack. Base isolation technology, essentially giant shock absorbers under building foundations, is standard in major construction. Trains automatically brake the instant sensors detect unusual ground motion. Hospitals are built to stay functional through major shaking. And from elementary school onward, Japanese kids drill earthquake response until it's muscle memory. Japan sits at the meeting point of 4 tectonic plates, and absorbs about 10% of the world's earthquakes, and roughly 20% of all magnitude 6 plus quakes anywhere on the planet. This isn't a country that occasionally has earthquakes. It lives inside seismic activity permanently, averaging around 1,500 felt quakes a year. The April rupture happened along the same stretch of the Japan Trench that produced the catastrophic 2011 Tohoku earthquake, a magnitude 9.1 event that killed nearly 20,000 people and triggered the Fukushima disaster. 15 years later, on the same fault system, a smaller but still powerful 7.4 quake killed nobody. That's not chance. That's proof that earthquake death tolls are decided by human choices made years before the shaking starts, not by geology alone. Now let's talk about the one that has scientists genuinely nervous: California. A team led by Dr. Lillian Burkhardt at the University of Bern in Switzerland published research in June 2026 concluding that the San Andreas fault system in Southern California is now under more stress than it's been in 1,000 years. Here's the mechanism. Tectonic plates are constantly trying to slide past each other, but friction locks sections of the fault in place near the surface. The plates keep moving deeper down, and all that unreleased motion gets stored as stress in the surrounding rock. It builds for years, decades, sometimes centuries, until it finally exceeds what the rock can hold, and the fault slips all at once. The longer a section stays locked, the more energy piles up, and the bigger the eventual earthquake tends to be. The southern San Andreas hasn't had a major rupture since the Fort Tejon earthquake in 1857, an estimated magnitude 7.9. That's 169 years of the Pacific and North American plates grinding past each other at roughly 5 centimeters a year with no major release. Burkhardt's team built a physics-based model simulating 1,000 years of earthquake history on the San Andreas and the neighboring San Jacinto fault, feeding it radiocarbon dating, tree ring records, and centuries of historical data. The conclusion: stress on multiple fault segments is now at or above the highest level seen anywhere in that 1,000-year simulation. This isn't approaching a threshold. According to the model, it's already past it. There's a second, more troubling finding. The San Andreas and San Jacinto faults intersect near a location called Kagan Pass, roughly 50 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. Researchers describe this junction as an earthquake gate. Under the right conditions, a rupture starting on the San Andreas could jump through this pass onto the San Jacinto fault, turning a single fault earthquake into a joint multi-fault event. Such a rupture could produce a magnitude between 7.4 and 7.8. Instead of threatening one corridor, it would simultaneously hit the Los Angeles Basin, San Bernardino, Riverside County, and the Coachella Valley. Right now, stress levels on both faults are elevated and close enough to each other that researchers say this gate is effectively unlocked. USC seismologist Ahmed Elbana summed up the timeline problem bluntly. The next big one could arrive today, in 10 years, or in 30. And on a geological timescale, there's essentially no difference between those. With over 13 million people in the greater LA metro area, thousands of vulnerable older apartment buildings, and gas, water, and electrical lines crossing active fault traces throughout the region, a joint rupture could trigger widespread fires, water main failures, collapsed freeways, and hospitals overwhelmed at the worst possible moment. Burkhardt's message to policymakers was direct: plan for a joint rupture as a realistic scenario, not a remote worst case. It's worth understanding why a jump from magnitude 7 to 8 sounds small, but isn't. The scale is logarithmic. Every whole number increase means about 10 times more ground movement and roughly 31 times more energy released. A magnitude 6 quake releases energy comparable to about 15,000 tons of TNT. A magnitude 7 is closer to 475,000 tons, something like 38 Hiroshima bombs. That's why scientists get uneasy once numbers start climbing past 7, and why depth and location matter just as much as the number itself. A 7.5 at 200 kilometers deep in an empty desert is a completely different event from a 7.5 at 10 kilometers deep under a city. There's another city seismologists watch with quiet dread: Istanbul. The North Anatolian Fault, one of the best-studied strike-slip faults on Earth, runs about 20 kilometers south of a city of over 16 million people. Through the 20th century, this fault produced a remarkably consistent sequence of major earthquakes marching steadily westward, culminating in the 1999 Izmit quake that killed over 17,000 people. The next segment in line, directly beneath the Sea of Marmara, just south of Istanbul, hasn't ruptured since 1766. Researchers estimate accumulated stress there corresponds to roughly 4.7 meters of pent-up fault movement, and they put the odds of a magnitude 7.3 plus quake striking beneath Istanbul in the next 30 years at around 47%, a near coin flip with a chunk of that window already gone. So is any of this connected? Are Venezuela, Japan, the Philippines, and Papua New Guinea part of some emerging pattern? Honestly, no, not in the way it feels. Earth has thousands of earthquakes every day, and a magnitude 6 or higher happens roughly 120 to 140 times a year, about once every 3 days somewhere on the planet. A cluster of major quakes in the same week is statistically normal, not a sign the planet is destabilizing. Venezuela sits on the boundary between the Caribbean and South American plates. Japan sits at a completely separate subduction zone thousands of kilometers away. These systems don't influence each other. What connects them all is the Ring of Fire, a roughly 40,000 kilometer arc of plate boundaries circling the Pacific that produces about 90% of the world's earthquakes. It's always active. And what's changed isn't the geology. It's how many people now live along it and in what kind of buildings. One genuine technological bright spot is earthquake early warning. When a fault ruptures, it sends out fast, low-energy P waves ahead of the slower, destructive S waves. Detecting that first signal buys precious seconds, sometimes tens of seconds, before real shaking arrives. That's enough time to duck under a desk, for a surgeon to pause mid-procedure, for a train to start braking, for an elevator to stop and open its doors. Japan has run this system since 2007, and it's exactly why the April 2026 quake caused 2 injuries instead of thousands. California's Shake Alert system delivered through the MyShake app is now active statewide and improving. Venezuela had no such system on June 24th. No alert, no warning, just 60 seconds of shaking that arrived without notice. That's really the through line here. The planet has been doing this for 4.5 billion years and will keep doing it long after we're gone. We can't stop earthquakes, and we still can't reliably predict exactly when they'll strike. But Japan has proven, decade after decade, that we absolutely can choose how ready we are when they do. The death toll from an earthquake isn't just a geological outcome, it's a human decision made years in advance. Venezuela shows what happens when poverty, instability, and neglected infrastructure collide with a 7.5. Japan shows what happens when a society takes that same risk seriously for generations. And California, right now, is the biggest open question, sitting on stress levels not seen in 1,000 years, waiting to find out which story it's going to tell.